Fab. Right. Good morning, folks. If you're not on mute, if you could just make sure that you're on mute. I'm Jenny Milne, for those of you that I haven't actually met online or in person before. I'm the founder of SRITC and also a director. And today, if my voice survives, you will hear more of me. If it doesn't, other people will step in. But for those of you new to a cafe, the format really is if you just stay mute at the beginning. We have 3 speakers who are going to share their knowledge and experience on electric vehicles. But while they're doing that, the chat box is your friend. Introduce yourself, where you're located, and if you want to depress me by saying it's sunny, say it's sunny. But it's all about sharing and thinking positively. She says while she coughs. So yes, without further ado, I'm just going to give you a bit of a quick synopsis of SRITC and what's been going on before I hand over to the team of cracking speakers. So for those of you that were at Fort William for the Scottish Rural and Island Parliament, you might have seen this slide before, or if you've been a cafe before. It's just sharing our core values of what we're all about, and obviously sharing innovation, sharing about within the community are completely key elements of SRITC, which is why we're here today. If you're not already on our news bulletin list, you might not be aware, but we produced a report from our event back in May, just a couple of weeks ago, and also produced the Lego report from the gathering, which was quite good fun, about how to take forward the steps for a rural and island mobility plan. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So as you can tell from what I'm saying, we're very much about bringing people together and trying to look at the problems that we've got and opportunities that we've got as well in a rural area. So please do make sure that you share as much information with other colleagues, because I do know from others that just that little bit of information does actually help people feel more included and not so isolated on their own. So I mentioned the Scottish Rural and Island Parliament. For those of you that weren't there, that was the beginning of November, and some of the team are here. It was a cracking 3 days. Not only did we run and curate a study visit, but we also worked with Stagecoach and Shield buses to provide transport for everybody around the area to their study visits and to their accommodation. There's a few things coming out of the Parliament at the moment, so keep an eye on that, but particularly around the rural delivery plan as well. There's more information coming, so watch this space is all I'm going to say. And also, if you haven't seen it in our news bulletins, we've been successful in getting funding to operate SRITC from Smarter Choices, Smarter Places, which is fantastic. They've got their main conference next week, which I'm hoping to be able to speak at. If not, other people will step in. But if there's anybody that's not able to get to the conference next week and wants us to fact find for any particular aspect, just put it in the chat and we can get back to you. So it's great news that we've got the funding. And with the funding opportunity comes an opportunity for a new position, which is a research and impact officer. So this is for 8 to 10 hours and it's freelance, excuse me, and it's to help us unpick and look at the value that can be offered and is offered within rural transport and SRITC, and you get to do lots of lovely different things. So I'm short and sweet for me today, I'm afraid, because I do want to try and keep the voice until the end. But I'm going to hand over, because I need to get their slides, I'm going to hand over to Tony. So Tony, if you want to kick off and I'll get your slides. You're on mute, Tony.
Start that one again, eh? Morning, everybody. Good to be here. I'm based in Montrose, and I can see the sunshine as well today, so that's nice. I work for a company called Co-Wheels Car Club, and we're a UK-based community interest company, and we operate car clubs all across the UK. But here in Scotland, which is my brief, we operate mainly in city locations like Aberdeen, Dundee, Glasgow, and we're just moving into Edinburgh now. But lots of other little places as well. And I started 12 years ago, back in 2012. And at that time, we were the first car club or hire car operator to actually put a hire car into the public domain, which was an EV. Oh, we've got my slide there. The top left-hand corner there has a picture of the very first car that we launched, which was an IMEV. And what's quite interesting now is that IMEV is actually in a transport museum in Afford as a permanent exhibit for being the first electric hire car. So we moved on from that, and shortly after deploying that one, we got 4 Nissan Leafs, which was very exciting at the time. Very exciting for me to take delivery of them, until I realized that none of them had rapid charge capability, and all of them were little 13 amp plug-in jobs. So that was a bit of a learning curve for our procurement people down in Newcastle, because up to that point, the only electric car experience they'd had was having one in Bristol, which was plugged in on an extension lead out the window. So we've come a long way now in terms of getting different vehicles in and trying them. We've had lots of Zoes and BMWs, and we've even had hydrogen cars as well, which was quite an experience. So as well as operating in the cities, we've also been exploring how to operate car clubs in rural locations, which is a very different kettle of fish, I can assure you. We've tried quite a few different locations, and the one that's the picture on the bottom left is quite an interesting one. This was the Isle of Skye, which we actually launched back in 2020, so right in the middle of COVID, obviously. It was a very short-term project that was funded by NHS Highlands, and the idea of this particular car was to provide an alternative for hospital transport. And we're probably going to pick up a lot on that conversation later, but this one was made available free of charge for people to use, providing they had a health-related journey that they wanted to make. And one of the particular ones that they were targeting was that trip from the Isle of Skye to Regmore Hospital in Inverness. And the idea was, instead of having to send an ambulance out to or other kind of hospital transport, people could take themselves and have a day out in Inverness, as well as dealing with their medical problems at the hospital, or they could get a friend or relative to drive them there as well. So it's quite an interesting project, but it only lasted 6 months. And as I say, it was right in the middle of COVID, so uptake was quite low, but it's certainly something that would be interesting to get revisited, because I think that one's quite an interesting one. So we've been in other locations as well. More recently, we've been operating in Orkney. As you can see, the standing stones at Steness in the bottom right-hand picture, where we've currently got 2 MG4s, one based in Stromness and one based in Kirkwall. And we do have another MG estate car in Kirkwall as well. We work there with some local partners, including Community Energy Scotland, EMEC, and the Reflex project. And again, it was another one that was launched in the middle of COVID back in 2019. We launched there just as things were kicking off. We got the 4 cars delivered that we were starting with there, but COVID struck, and it was another 8 months before we got a charge post put in. So there we were with 4 cars sat there doing nothing. But I'm pleased to say that over 2022 in particular, and 2023 now, we've seen some steady uptake in the use of these vehicles. Interesting, a lot of people coming over from Aberdeen and from Scrabster, leaving their cars behind and booking the electric cars to use while they're on holiday on the island. But the other key use for these cars on Orkney has been from islanders living off the mainland Orkney, who travel over and need access to a car. And in the past, and still is a case for a lot of people, they often keep a car on mainland Orkney just for the need when they occasionally come over to do the shopping or whatever. But we've seen an uptake in people living in places like Westray, who come across and now use the car club car, which is obviously a great bonus. And we've got about 200 members in Orkney now, so that's been encouraging as well. The bottom, I should say, the top right picture is quite interesting. Not only have we got cars on mainland Orkney, but for a 2-week period, we actually put one on North Ronaldsay, which is the most northerly of the Orkney Islands. And the only way to get it there, of course, was to send it by freighter. And you can see them offloading it there. So no roll-on ferry going to Ronaldsay. Which has a population of 72 people and what was it, 3,500 sheep, I believe. So it's not a place where we would normally operate a car club because of the low population numbers, but it was set up for a 2-week period to take part in an environmental festival they had up there at that time. So that was great to be able to support that. Some of the challenges that we face obviously are sending cars to North Ronaldsay, but obviously we have to have charging solutions for our EVs. We rely on dedicated parking spaces most of the time for a car club car. So when you're allocated a charge post wherever it is, you're stuck there. And if that charge post breaks down, your car's out of use basically until it's repaired, and that's probably the biggest challenge we've got at the moment is charge post reliability across the entire country. And I don't know what the solution is to that, because obviously charge post operators, and if we've got any here today, it'd be lovely to hear from them how they go about allocating their time to doing repairs. I think in rural locations, the chance of getting repairs done quicker than in the city is very much going to be a problem. But other than that, car prices, we're still waiting for car prices to fall to a level whereby electric cars are at the same sort of price as IC cars, petrol cars, because we're having to invest a lot more money into getting electric cars to replace all the EVs, to replace all the IC cars. Interestingly, we just won the contract again in Glasgow, and within that contract, we've got to replace all our petrol cars with either hybrid or EVs. So a lot of councils now moving to that situation, which is pushing car clubs to improve their stock and make them all electric or hybrid as quickly as possible. So that's a big challenge for us. Some of the opportunities that we've got are particularly for rural locations. We offer a community rural franchise. This means that the community can come and operate their own car club operation, and we've got one in Huntly, which is a prime example. If any of you have come across that one, definitely worth looking at that one. That's run by the Huntly Development Trust. And this is where everything's included within the package, and even allows the franchise operator, the community, if it's successful in their area, to even make some money out of it. So if anybody's interested in that after today's event, please do get in touch with me. I think that's probably me running out of time, am I, Jenny? Nod your head. Yes, yeah, over time. So I'll not waste any more time, but answer questions later and pass you straight on to Alan.
Thank you very much. So hello, everyone. I'm Alan Gristwood. I'm the operations manager at Boat of Garten Community Hall. So for all of you who were at the gathering last year, you might have bumped into me. I was running the bar in the evening. I tend to do lots of things around here, very varied role. Boat of Garten Hall is a charity. So as such, we various income streams that we need to tap into in order to survive as an organisation. We're very reliant on fundraising from volunteers, as well as we have corporate businesses coming in, such as you guys, and a few other local ones that are really good patrons of ours. We do private parties, weddings, things like that, which again, these are good towards our overall income, which is quite substantial actually. What we need to raise every year in order just to break even. And our plan every year is that we're not for profit, so we should balance the books, and that sort of falls to me every year to make that work. And then our third income stream is what I would just call others, and it's things like we've got PV panels on our roof. We look for grant funding when it's available. We've got ground source heating, which we get RHI funding for, and one of the other ones that we put in was our EV points. So we've got 2 points here, which were installed in 2020. So a year before I started with the hall, so I'm just in my third year now. In 2020, we got grant funding from the Energy Saving Trust, which allowed us to put that in place. 2020 was middle of COVID, so it wasn't really used. We had lockdown, and then no one was able to travel. 2021, we I think started using it then. 2022 was our first big year. 2021 we had some fairly big issues with the unit, which I'll talk about later on anyway. But now 2023 is probably our busiest year with it, and we see a lot of uptake of people coming to the village in order to use the charge point. Interestingly, I was talking to one of our former directors about it just last week with this in mind. I knew I was coming along to this, so I was asking him for a little bit more of the background into the unit and when it had been done and what we reckoned our profitability would be and so on. And it was sort of clear from the outset that the hall didn't do it necessarily to make any big amount of money out of it. We did it because it was the right thing to do. And I think when you see the charge point units round the Strath, so the area that we live in, certainly Boat of Garton needs to be on the map from a tourist point of view. You know, we're fully reliant on the tourist industry, as well as our locals, of course. But locals tend to have their own pod points in their houses now, as I do. But this does bring people to the village, and without doubt is the right thing from a community perspective for us to have in place. So we've got a number of parties involved in making the units work. So it's administered by Charge Place Scotland, and anybody who's used it will know there's the app on your phone that you use to connect. We've Swarco, who are responsible for receiving the charge payments, and then they pay out to us on a monthly basis. We get a very good itemized spreadsheet of all of the connections that have been made, how long it was for. So that actually lets us look very clearly at whether or not we were actually running at a profit or not over the month, which is a good thing. And then finally, excuse me, we have our maintenance contact in place with BP Pulse. I think if anybody's putting one in, anyone's putting in a new EV unit, they need to sort of start with that in mind. The BP Pulse obviously don't do it for free, so the cost of your maintenance needs to be baked into your overall business plan of putting in the EV unit. We actually ran for a while without any maintenance. We hadn't realised from the outset that our warranty would run out after a year, so we had a period of time where we didn't have official maintenance in place. But in fairness to BP Pulse, they stepped in pretty quickly, and they are quite proactive now in noticing if there's an issue with our unit, and they simply send out an engineer without us even necessarily knowing there's been an issue, which is on the good side. We were talking in our group before this meeting started about the profitability or the charging that happens in the area. Now we've pretty much got a captive audience here. Someone comes to the hall to plug their car in, then it's because they need, you know, they need some juice in it. They're not coming for fun necessarily. So with that in mind, we don't want to be, you know, putting our tariff too high on that. But what was clear to us, and I was having a discussion from a gentleman from one of our other community halls in the next village along earlier this year, and he was asking us, you know, how do we calculate whether or not we're making money out of it, which was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, if I'm honest. We hadn't really looked at it too carefully, other than in our profit and loss, which we look at in our finances every month. We've got a number that comes in from SWARCO, so we know we've money. But what wasn't clear was the impact that has on our electricity bill, which is actually considerable. So I would say for anybody putting it in, be prepared for your electricity bill to, I mean, I wouldn't like to put a number on what it is, but certainly ours is pretty high, and I think it's probably gone up roughly, I'm trying to work out the maths, probably about 30% actually of our electricity bill, if I think about it. So and the key to that is keeping an eye with the energy prices just now. Depending on what tariff you're on, rates can change a lot. I've recently been looking at tariffs in our local area, and I've noticed some EV points must be running at a loss just now. So I don't know who's funding them, but there's one in Aberlour, for example. I think it's 30 pence per kilowatt hour, and certainly our tariff with EDF just now, the best one we could get is 32 pence per kilowatt hour. So we need to be north of that at least, so that the thing is at least cleaning its feet, if you like. Terms of issues we've had, so I've mentioned that we've got Charge Place, SWARCO, and then BP Pulse. The lack of ownership there, when there's an issue and multiple parties are involved, was a big issue back last summer. And thanks to Jenny, we got Fergus Ewing involved. So we got our MSP involved, and he carries a fair bit of clout actually, which was good. He went to the top man in BP right away. I loved his approach. Go straight to the top man, and top down approach. Got some pretty good answers quite quickly, and we got it fixed within a couple of weeks. Most issues we have can be fixed with a reboot of the unit. Now that means that someone in the hall here has to go to the plant room, find the fuse on the fuse board, and physically switch it off and back on again. And the unit seems to sort itself out after that. I've got example of that. I mean, I've experience of that on Wednesday this week. I had my car charging for the morning. I was in a bit of a hurry to go home actually. I had a meeting in the afternoon, and could not disconnect it, and then I couldn't physically move the unit out of the or my cable out of the unit. I did manage I did reboot the unit. Luckily I was the only car that was using it at the time, so you know, it was in my gift to go and do that. If I'd been in someone else's unit somewhere else in the country, then I don't know what I would have done. That gives me a little bit of anxiety now. If I was ever going to plug my car into someone else's unit, you think, well, what happens here? Do I leave my cable? What if I've got a flight to catch, or you know, I don't know. But I also been called, because we've got our phone number on the front door of the hall. I've been phoned by stressed out users of the unit before, saying, help, can you come and help me? Luckily I live 5 minutes away, so I was able to pop round and do a reboot, and off they went happy. We do have issues with the unit going offline. So the comms of that go offline from time to time. It seems to come back on, but it's your own bad luck, I guess, if you happen to be trying to use a unit at the time it's gone offline. And then just the final point there, range anxiety. That's something that whenever I speak to people who come to the community hall from outside the area on holiday. I think there's a bit of a given in the central belt, and I would say Dundee down. The infrastructure there seems to be pretty good. People expect there to be a lot of units, and then I think they come to the north of Scotland and get a little bit of a surprise as to exactly how few and far between the units can be, and whether they're online, offline, and you might need to go to the next town to try and get one. I know Tony had that issue last year when he was here. We were talking about that earlier on. So that's my experience as an EV owner. I'm just having a look through to see if there's any questions in the chat here. I know there was someone asking me something.
Go straight to Katie and we'll come back to the question.
Katie, okay, thanks then. So let's go over to Katie.
Sorry, I'd muted myself and couldn't work out how to get it back onto mute. Off mute. So I'm going to give you a bit of context. I think that's quite important here to sort of explain who I am and where I come from. But my name is Kathryn Logan, and I am one of the NSS Sustainability Managers. So NSS is a special board that sits within the UK's or the Scottish National Health Service, and we provide advice and services to the rest of the NHS Scotland. Now, NSS is responsible for about 10 different directorates, and these sort of span all areas of the health service. So this includes things like national procurement. So during COVID, when we required PPE, we were looking at obtaining that and distributing it. And we're also responsible for one of our other directorates, which is SNBTS, which is the Scottish National Blood and Transfusion Service. So that basically means that any blood in the entirety of Scotland comes to one of our sites, gets processed, and then is distributed. And there's a few other directorates there as well that are also really important that I'll talk about a bit more detail, but as I'm hoping you can see, that transport is really a key area within NSS that we need to be sort of mindful for. We are in the process of developing our travel and transport policy, and we are taking a digital first approach where possible. But as this is the healthcare service, there are occasions where that's not always possible, especially as I mentioned, we cover the whole of Scotland. So we do have sites up in Raigmore all the way down to sort of the south of Scotland. And we also have staff that actually look at maintaining some of our medical equipment, which means that they do need to get ferries and boats and all of the above to our islands as well, because and they have to travel by car because a lot of their equipment is really heavy and it's not necessarily feasible in public transport. So I'm firstly going to give you a bit of a talk over some of our National Fleet Support Unit. Now I've pinched this slide from our transport engineer, but I'm hoping just to do a bit of an overview and sort of talk about some of the challenges that we've faced in the process. So on our top left-hand side, we've got our National Fleet Management System, and this basically looks at what vehicles that we have across the entirety of the health boards in Scotland. So I know these along the bottom here have got sort of little acronyms, but if you come right to the end, the third one from the right is SNBTS, and right now it's sort of a combination of vans and trucks and cars. Now, because we are part of the NHS, we are looking at ensuring our fleet meets our Scottish Government requirements, which is for all vehicles to be no longer to be diesel or petrol post 2025. That is going to be a challenge based on where these vehicles travel, but we're hoping that with some additional funding we might be able to get there. One of the things I also want to highlight is in the bottom corner here, where we talk about Transport Scotland switched on fleets. Now this is a funding grant that is available for us to bid on. I know since 2019 we have put in a bid for we've won sort of 16.4 million, but that's across all of the NHS health boards. I've got the next slide. I sort of talk about it a wee bit more specifically for NSS. But what I wanted to highlight here is over the last couple of years, this funding has been explicitly for EV charging points. Not so you can't actually purchase the vehicles. Now I'm sure many of you know there is that chicken and egg challenge here about making sure there's enough infrastructure in place for people to buy the vehicles, or what needs to come first. But we're kind of becoming to get at that tipping point where we're getting there with the infrastructure, but we maybe need to start thinking about how we're going to replace some of our vehicles. I do believe when we spoke with Transport Scotland last, they'd kind of come to the conclusion that sort of that tipping point is for every electric vehicle that we have within NHS Scotland, there should be or for every charger, I should say, sorry, there should be at least 3 electric vehicles. So it's when we get to that tipping point, I think we need to start thinking about what's going to happen next. The other things I wanted to sort of highlight was in this top right-hand corner, there's a national vehicle telematics contract, which actually looks at where our vehicles are and sort of does real-time tracking. I guess if people think back to during Scottish winters where they've got all those ice trucks that have all the funny names, it's kind of similar to that, where we can sort of see exactly where our vehicles are to make sure that they're within range of an electric vehicle charging point. And then the other thing I just wanted to highlight was this bottom right-hand corner, and it's part of the National Breast Screening Programme. So NSS is responsible for the distribution of our national breast screening vans, and we give those to the other health boards. And I'm hoping if you live in some of the rural areas, you might have seen them. And basically, these are truck vans that are help with sort of conducting mammograms, etc., where it's maybe more difficult for people to get to sort of main hospital locations. So we have these sort of scattered around some of our rural areas. There's about 20 of these vans. As of next year, they'll be down to 18, but by the end of, I think, September 2024, they should all be electric. There's been some challenges with these in the past because they have had diesel generators as a backup system, because we can't afford to let them sort of fail when they're in use, and they do have a lot of they do require a lot of energy and an energy supply. So there is some challenges there, but actually they've been really well utilized, and they're a really fast and efficient service. So if you do need to utilize one, I would recommend it because they're quite cool, and you can be in and out of that service within 7 minutes. And they are sort of held by location based on the health board itself. So we don't necessarily have control of where they're going and where they're located. We just simply provide the vehicles within NSS. So it's a bit of a back and forth conversation there. And then the only other things I wanted to sort of highlight, and I'm happy to answer more questions on them, is what some of the things and some of the challenges we've had sort of internally within NSS. So this top left one up here, as I've highlighted here, the NSS last year secured £650,000 from Transport Scotland for their Switch On Plates initiative. And we originally put in a bid for £550,000 for the installation of 40 new electric vehicle charging points. And then we realised that actually some of our staff are having a little bit of trouble in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. So we've actually been able to secure an additional £100,000 from this initiative to put in a couple of electric vehicle charging points at our blood and donation centres in Aberdeen. And this was because we were having staff having a bit of challenging travelling from Glasgow up to Aberdeen without actually being able to charge their vehicles. Currently, there's not an integrated shared EV system in place between the health boards. However, that is something that we're hoping to get worked on in the future, because it's become a bit of a siloed approach between us looking for where we can find our electric vehicle charging points. And as I mentioned, a lot of this funding is directly just for EV charging infrastructure and not the vehicles themselves. So it's something that we need to be sort of cautious of as we sort of plan forward. As NSS is a public body, we do have to comply with the whole systems infrastructure planning, which is made by the Scottish Government. And that basically asks us to plan from now until 2040 what it is we're going to need in terms of our estates and our fleet, and how we plan to see sort of things move in that direction. Now, I appreciate that there is sometimes we have to do this with a bit of pinch of salt. I don't think anybody expected COVID to happen, but that's the type of thing we need to sort of think about as well as planning this forward. So we are doing a bit of a comprehensive piece of work just now to sort of estimate what it is that we're going to need moving forward. And I think that'll help depend exactly where we're going to put our EV charging points. Within NSS, we also have the additional challenge that we rent a lot of our buildings, or we lease floors on buildings. And because of that, we don't tend to own some of the land that buildings sit on, which actually makes the placement of electric vehicles a lot more challenging, because we can't always put them where we think that they need to be put. So it is doing a bit of collaborative work with Scottish Government and other public bodies to make sure that we can charge our vehicles on site, especially if there's not a booking system in place. So it's a big bit of work that we're looking at doing just now. Well, I'll just mention these last two things here, because I realize the last bit's about active travel, but this middle slide here was looking at our electric vehicle charging at one of our other key sites, which is at Gyle Square in one of our headquarters. these charging points were put in 2016, and they're now really beginning to look like they were put in 2016. So it's looking at what sites we're going to retain and if we can upgrade them in the future. And then the last thing I was just going to quickly mention was one of the pilot areas that we're looking at in the future is HVO fuels, and there's been some work doing the ground testing for looking at HVO fuels in NSS in the future. And I'll not mention the last two bits there, but maybe at another meeting in the future to talk about actual travel.
Thank you very much, everybody. There's lots of things in the chat.